I think it's very important to understand the importance of being intentional about the kinds of things you want to achieve as well, and not just taking in what people say you have to do and just following what they say is the right path for you in a sense, right? So it's really understanding a bit more about yourself, being intentional about the kinds of things you want to achieve, and I think to kickstart that whole process is also a journey in itself. So you have to take that first step to wanting to understand yourself a bit better.
Marcus Cheu is a high performer mindset coach who works with aspiring entrepreneurs, side hustlers, and sales professionals to help them get unstuck over the next steps and develop a high performer mindset so that they can crush their goals. Marcus is also the host of the JourneyNorth podcast, designed for curious souls who are seeking direction, focus, and guidance in life. On the podcast, Marcus gets thought leaders and experts to share about their success, failures, and struggles in life to extract valuable insights to help people live their lives to the fullest. So in this episode, we'll find out what led him to where he is today, how he navigated his journey towards personal development coaching and podcasting. Marcus, I'm so glad to host you on this podcast.
Yeah, super excited to be on this show as well, and thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. Okay, so Marcus, why don't we just start off by sharing a little bit about what you're doing right now, and a brief history of where you came from. What are some of the things that you did before that?
Sure. So I think there's actually quite a bit to share, but I think just for me as where I am right now. So I'm actually still a student. So I'm year 3 in SMU studying business in finance, which is quite ironic considering how I've sort of veered away from finance as time goes by. And right now I'm actually venturing into my own coaching business where, as you said, looking to go into the high performance mindset coaching, where I help entrepreneurs sort of find their way around productivity, time management, mindset, the kind of shifts that they require to really put themselves to the next level. And that is something that I've learned to really like over the past experiences that I've worked on, and I think I'll be probably diving in a bit deeper later. But yeah, so I think those are interesting times for me, especially now, because I've sort of like found what I want to work towards for the foreseeable future, and I think it's really exciting, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for me.
Wow. Okay. So right now you're still studying in SMU. You have not graduated yet, right? And it sounds like you've already kind of figured out what you want to do, which is great, because most people like me, myself, don't really know what we want to do even before we graduate.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, even at this point, I wouldn't say I found like the thing, but just 6 months to a year ago, I was exactly where you are, and that's actually how it led me to that self-discovery and self-development journey that I am on today. So, I think it's completely fine. And I think a lot of people face that same problem of, what should I do with my life? Or like, what should I be pursuing in the near future? That kind of thing. I think it is also a question that I asked myself, especially as I'm about to graduate in about a year's time. And that's really when it started to hit me, where can I go next? And that's how I, started asking myself that question.
Nice. So what are some of the things that gave you the conviction of doing coaching and getting into productivity?
Yeah. So I think to set the context, right, I need to say of like how I need to briefly touch on how I actually got started first. So first and foremost, I was actually put into a role where I had to join a startup with my friend that he founded. And back then I had to adopt sort of like a leadership role, I would say, where I had to manage a team of people. We had to drive this project forward. And since young, because my dad is an entrepreneur himself, I've always been interested in the concept of like businesses, entrepreneurship. So I've always wanted to like step into that world, right, the entrepreneurship world. So that was my first venture of sorts, like a project to lead with my friends. And before that, I always thought of myself as someone who's relatively self-disciplined. I can hit deadlines. I didn't have any problem finishing work during my school days. But it was when I actually started this role, when I started this like entrepreneurial project of sorts, that you are sort of like handed a clean slate on like an everyday basis. Because if you think about it, if you have work, you have school, or if you have a job, right? Your boss sort of hands you your schedule and say that, this is what you have to complete by this week, this is what you have to complete by next week, and you have sort of an idea of where that puts you and how your schedule will play out, right? But as an entrepreneur, when you're leading your own project, you have to set up your own schedules and you have to decide when are your own deadlines. And that was one of my biggest struggle when I first started out, because I didn't know how to fill my days. I know there are a lot of things I have to do, right? But when exactly do I need to finish them by? Exactly do I need to complete certain things by? What are the most pressing issues, right? And so that's how I got started to read a lot more about how people manage their days. How do you be more productive? How do you like see what needs to be done? How to prioritize your to-do list in that sense. So that was really how I got started into that journey. And after you dabble into it, after I started reading more and more, I realized that there's this whole another like world out there of self-development, personal growth, which is something you don't realize until you step into it. And after going through the process, I felt like, wow, now that I'm having gone through that process, I feel like these kind of information that I've gathered over the past few months, past few years, will bring a lot of value to other people. And I can see how that has helped me grow as a person as well. And so that was when I started to tinker with the concept of, perhaps I could be a coach, bring these concepts to other people, help bring value and add value to other people as well, to help them see how I've benefited from the kind of work that I've done on myself. And yeah, I think that's really how I got interested in the concept of like productivity, time management, mindset, and eventually coaching.
Nice. Okay. I think you've experienced one of the biggest changes anyone would have in their life, because you mentioned that you were very good in following deadlines and generally just following tasks that were given to you. But then when you join a startup while you were in university, obviously in a startup, there's nobody that's going to tell you, hey, we need to do this. Maybe there's some meetings and tasks, but pretty much you have to fill your own day with your own things, because as a startup, there are many things to be done. And so it's going from being a follower to being a leader, and that's what got you started into diving into how to lead a team, how to fill your schedule, how to be productive, and all that, so that you can get to the ambitions of the startup. Great. So now that you have already learned those things from books and it has become a part of you, how do you feel about these changes compared to the previous you before you actually joined the startup?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest change that I would say is the concept of like intention. So what I mean by that is actually planning out what you intend to achieve and working towards it. So I think I'm speaking from my perspective, where I've gone a very traditional route of secondary school, JC, and then eventually university, where I feel like a lot of times we just sort of like let life pass us by, in a sense where, this is what we have to do to get to the next stage, this is what we have to do to achieve the next thing. And most of the time it's like grades in that sense, right? Having to achieve good grades. But after my journey thus far, right, I realized it's one thing to live life as it is, and another to actually be intentional about how you lead your life. So that is one of the biggest shifts that I felt has benefited me the most, because now I would actually look at my week and see what are the kinds of things I want to achieve, or what are the kinds of things that I want to work on my own personal self, instead of just, this is a deadline I have to hit, I just have to finish it, and then whatever works after that, right? So I think it's very important to understand the importance of being intentional about the kinds of things you want to achieve as well, and not just taking in what people say you have to do and just following what they say is the right path for you, in a sense, right? So it's really understanding a bit more about yourself, being intentional about the kinds of things you want to achieve, and Yeah, and I think to kickstart that whole process is also a journey in itself. So you have to take that first step to wanting to understand yourself a bit better. So, yeah.
So when you say intent, can you give me a bit more details on what you mean by that? It's not just doing a task, as you mentioned, but you actually wanting to do the task with certain goals and visions or even intentions to do something. And yeah, can you give me more examples of that?
Yeah, sure. So I think a better way to put that is whether these tasks are actually in alignment with your core values, your personal goals, your personal like vision or ambitions, right? So I think that's why I say before you even go about this whole intention part, you have to understand yourself a lot better, in the sense where you have to understand what are your eventual like end goal that you have for yourself in mind, your vision, your goals, the kinds of things that you want to achieve, your purpose even. And once you have that, you want to align the kinds of things you are doing in line with the things that will take you to where they are. So, for instance, some people say they want to be maybe a writer eventually. They want to be a very famous writer, right? But on a daily basis, maybe they are not reading any books. They are not writing any books. They are just like maybe studying for work. They are maybe doing marketing stuff. And there's a disconnect in the sense where you say you want to be a writer, but you're not doing the things that will bring you to where you want to be, right? So if you have that end goal in mind, that purpose that you want to achieve at the end of the day, you have to be very intentional about setting even your daily actions to align with what you want to achieve at the end of the day.
Okay. So previously, before you discovered this idea of doing things with real intent to align with your core values, what do you think was preventing you from really, doing it with real intent back then?
I think that is like the holy grail of sorts, right? Like finding your purpose in that sense, having something to work towards. Because I think something a lot of people will rebut is they will say like, I don't know what I'm working towards. I don't know what is the end thing that I want to work towards. And that was a question that I faced myself as well. But I think along the way, what I've realized is that having that thought at the back of my mind was more of an excuse for me to not start executing and see where that will eventually take me. So I always go back to it and say like, I don't know what I want to work towards. I don't know what I want to achieve. And then I just don't do anything. But if you think about it, if you don't actually take that first step to go and try something, you wouldn't even know whether you like it or not. Correct?
Like you want to do something, but you're kind of like procrastinating. Like, maybe I want to do it, but maybe I don't want to do it. Right?
Yeah, so a lot of people might say they don't know what their passion is, what their purpose is. But the thing is, you have to actually try different things to see whether it works out for you, right? So if, let's say, you haven't even tried sports, for instance, just an example, and then you are straight away like dismissing it as a possible option without even trying it. But then perhaps after you start kicking a ball, you realize you like the thrill of sports, you like the excitement that it brings you. So these kinds of things are things that you will never find out if you never actually step out to do it. So I think a huge part of it, and what I try to do nowadays is, instead of like falling back on that no purpose as an excuse for myself to not do anything, start trying different things, start speaking to people, start putting yourself out there and seeing what opportunities you attract for yourself. And then from there, you'll be able to sieve out what you like best, what doesn't work for you. And then you can slowly piece together the little bits and pieces that form your identity and what you eventually will stand for.
Yeah, I love it. I love how you just described the entire process of how we can go from no purpose to just starting out, just go out there and talk to people, and eventually you would find something. And I think that's really powerful, because if we don't do anything, then we will eventually lead very purposeless lives. And really the difference between where we are today and where we want to be tomorrow is really just starting out, instead of just waiting for a purpose to land in our minds and say, I finally discovered my purpose, or I finally had the holy grail, which obviously doesn't exist. But really is just going out there and try something out, and you eventually have you will eventually find your purpose. And it's a journey, right? It's not like we can get there immediately on day two or day three. And one of the things that you have obviously started is your own podcast, which you are interviewing and talking to people, right? So tell me a bit more about how this podcast that you've started has been helping you to discover your purpose.
Yep. So it's quite coincidental because if you asked me a year ago if I would be a podcast host, I would have tell you like hell no, I didn't see myself as a podcast host ever. So what happened was actually in the startup that I worked on, we actually started a podcast as an initiative to drive brand awareness. And that was how I really got into the podcasting space. And what was interesting is that I managed to get to talk to a lot of people, understand the kind of thought process and the kind of perspectives they brought about. And from my role as a podcast host with the previous startup that I was at, I was really intrigued by the whole process that, I eventually started my own one because I really liked the idea of being able to speak to people and using the podcast as a platform to reach out to people that I might not have otherwise access to, right? So through that whole journey, it sort of formed a self-starter project for myself as well, where I managed to bring the whole project to fruition, and eventually seeing that come to life was like a validation for me as well, that I can do something and put it out there for the world to enjoy. So that in itself was quite an accomplishment for myself. But the whole idea of podcasting is really about meeting people, getting to know about what kinds of experiences they brought to their own lives and everything, and learning from their past journeys. So through their stories and the experiences that they shared, I really gained a lot of perspectives that I didn't think about previously. And because nowadays I try to go to people with a bit more seniority, with a bit more experience in their respective fields, the kinds of insights that they bring about is something that they have gathered over the years. So it's not something that you can arrive at just within a few months or a few years. So I realized that the insights that they bring about is really very valuable, and it has sort of shifted my perspective of the kinds of things that I need to work towards even as I graduate. So I think one thing that I've realized is the perspective of time and the whole career perspective, because what I realized is a lot of these experts themselves, they started out as people not too different from us, right? Mm-hmm. Who they might not have realized what they wanted to do at the end of the day back when they were in university. They might not have found their purpose back then. But a lot of them went through the same process and emerged stronger than ever. So that kind of perspective really made me realize that as long as I stick to whatever I think I'm doing correctly, as long as I put in the hard work, put in the hours, eventually I will be able to arrive at where I want to at. So I think patience is really important in that aspect, where I don't need to constantly worry about, will this thing work out? Will this thing go wrong? But it's really about believing in yourself and just putting in the hard work required and trusting that eventually I will get to where I want to be.
Nice. It's great that you learn all these things that you otherwise wouldn't if you had not just go out there and start your own podcast and meet people that you otherwise wouldn't have met. So tell me more about the name. It's very interesting, right? JourneyNorth. How did you come up with this name? And I'd like to hear more about what are some of the other names that you have considered.
Wow, the other names, I actually went through quite a few. So I'll just briefly touch on how I came up with the origins of JourneyNorth. So initially it was Journey to the North, which was quite similar to Journey to the West, that show with Sunukon and everything. Yeah. And then I was just asking people around, and then they said it was too similar. And so after a while, I was like, I could just take away the tutor and make it JourneyNorth. So the concept, the meaning that I want to brought across here was there is a journey, because back then when I started the podcast, I was like everyone else, where I was trying to find my meaning, my purpose, my life goals and everything. So I wanted it to encapsulate the kinds of stories and perspectives that I would get from speaking to people that would help me figure out what I wanted to do in my own journey. And North meaning like finding your North Star in that sense with like purpose and everything, but also the concept of constantly moving forward. So you don't just want to stay stagnant in whatever you do, but you always want to be moving forward. And I encapsulate it in the word North because you want to keep moving upwards. So I brought those two words together, and then it came to become JourneyNorth. And I must say I'm quite satisfied with the eventual name that I come up with, because there was a struggle between like, oh, I just need to settle on one name and then get it started. So it took quite a process, but eventually I was able to come up with JourneyNorth, and I'm quite happy with it.
Nice. Okay. So great. Tell me a bit more about what are your current career goals. You mentioned that you have several initiatives that you've started. You have a podcast right now. You're studying finance. Where are you going right now in terms of your career? Yeah.
I imagine it can seem quite confusing given that I'm in finance and I'm in podcasting and everything. But so to touch on finance first, right? It was actually something I picked because of my interest in it, because I'm naturally a bit more interested I'm a bit more like mathy, like with numbers and everything. And I started like investing on myself back then. So finance was a natural inclination back then. And I still like finance, but along the way, I didn't really like the finance industry culture in a sense, where it's like super cutthroat, super competitive, and I didn't exactly see the point in putting myself into a bloodbath, right? It's like knowing that it's going to be very competitive and throwing myself into that. So that was around the same period of time where I chanced upon these other opportunities. So when I started podcasting, I realized that to monetize a podcast is not easy by any means. I mean, the initial thought was obviously just to put content out there to bring value to others. But when you put in so much effort, you want to see some returns from it as well, right? And more often than not, you want some monetary gains from it as well. But monetizing a podcast is very difficult on its own. And that's when I realized that I had to have something else to drive it towards. So that was when I started to explore alternative opportunities where I can leverage on this platform for content. So that's when I started to speak to a lot of coaches as well. And then I like the concept of a coach, because when you are stuck at a certain plateau, right, the only way you can go to the next level, I think Brendon Burchard said this or something. It's either you change something within yourself or you bring something into your lives, right? So those are the only two ways you can grow. And bringing a coach will help you in that sense, where you get someone who has been through the same path that you've gone through, know the struggles that you face, and then help you sort of like shortcut the whole process. So I thought that was something that I wanted to help others to do, because I've been through the process. I know how is it like to be feeling super frustrated, super lost, super unmotivated at not knowing what the next day holds for me. And I wanted to help people to gain a better mindset in that sense, help them to hit their goals. So that's where I'm at the moment. And for the next year, until I graduate at least, that is what I'm going to be focused on until graduation. So
nice. Okay. So describe to me the ideal kind of people that you like to coach. What is their profile like? What do they want? What kind of problems are they facing, and how can you help them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for now, I wanted to target people who are millennials, so like similar age range with me, because I feel like I'll be able to relate to them a bit more, given that we are of a similar age range. We are facing the same like life questions in that sense. And I want to work with people who definitely are committed to working on themselves. So what I mean by that is, I think a lot of the things that are out there, there's this phrase called, there's like common knowledge isn't always common practice. So I think a lot of things people already know, but they don't always do. But I want people who, once you get certain advice from me, or like what has worked for me, I want them to be able and be willing to execute on them. Because the worst thing is, you give advice, you know that it works, but people don't act on it. and then they are like, oh, why isn't things working out for me? Right. So I want to be working with people who are committed to their personal growth, who want to genuinely improve their performance, improve their mindset, and want to get to the next level. Because if they don't have that inner drive in them, the journey is not going to be easy, right? There's going to be a lot of obstacles in the way. There's a lot of fears that they have to overcome. And I want to work with someone who's willing to stand in the face of fear and still be able to overcome them, to execute on whatever is necessary to get them to the next step. So yeah, that's the kind of profile of people that I want to be working with.
So you're looking for people who want to take action in their lives, and they know that they are facing some kind of problems of finding out what they want to do, and they're willing to try something, right? And
Absolutely.
you want to have to give them some advice on that. Okay, great. So what are some of the key experiences that you have that you believe would be very beneficial for you to share with the people that you coach, and in general, right? What are some of the key experiences that you believe will help you to succeed in this coaching business?
Right. So the whole concept of the coach, right, is always about teaching people what you've been through. And for me, what that was the whole, I would say two parts to it. So the first one is the startup experience that I got. So over there, what I faced was extreme levels of low motivation in that sense, because I've always been someone who have been relatively productive, but at that point in time, I was at a stage of my life where, because I didn't know what I was working towards, because I didn't have the right mindset, if you would say, I wasn't able to, I wasn't in a very good place in that sense, where I would wake up, not knowing what I would want to do for the rest of the day. And even if I know what needs to be done, I can't bring myself to do it. It was I would say burnout in a certain way, but also just not a very good place to be in, right? And through that process, the kinds of coaches that I sought out, the kinds of books that I had to read to gain that kind of knowledge to pick myself up, those are things that you need to go through them and experience them for you to be able to help people in that process. So I think that whole startup experience of how I was able to overcome those frustrations, those low points, is something that I think would be very valuable to people, because I could relate to how they are feeling. What are the tips that I use to actually overcome these levels of low levels of motivation and everything. And the second part is about the podcasting. So I think where that relates to is really about how I managed to overcome a lot of things that I didn't like. So I'm not sure whether you could tell, but I didn't grow up as someone who's very confident and very eloquent in speaking. So when I was young, I was someone who's very low in confidence. I don't like to be seen on social media and everything. But because I was doing a podcast, I had to market it. I actually had to force myself to do certain things. But then obviously there's a lot of fear involved in the whole process. And in that process, there are also a lot of things that I learned of how you can face certain fears, still overcome it, or, having had a schedule laid out in front of you, how can you hit them and make sure a project goes to fruition, does well and everything. So I think those are the two aspects and experiences that I feel will help people, or like people who I'll be coaching and everything. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I think everybody starts somewhere, and when it comes to confidence, I think it's a journey by itself. We have to build it up intentionally, right? Going back to your point about intent. Some people are just born more confident. I think great. If they surround themselves with people who are very confident, then yeah, I think they would naturally become more confident. But in a society like Singapore, where we have to just focus on study, and mostly just being by ourselves, we feel very comfortable with ourselves. But then when we put ourselves out there in the media, where we will be like, wait. I think that's, we have some natural fears or apprehension towards that. But I think that's a perfectly normal process, and I really like how you're just going out there and you're just ignoring the fear. It's going to be there, right? The fear is not going to go away. But I love how you basically manage to keep it under control through all the trainings and productivities that you have learned from books and tips. And I believe that you would be able to, give those people who need help a role model example of how you can overcome that.
I hope so.
Yeah. So what is the kind of, impact that you want to have on people who listen to your podcast or come into your coaching, what is the kind of impact that you want to give to your listeners?
I think one of the main impact that I wanted to drive through the podcast is to let people understand that it's okay to be where they are at the moment. And all that matters is that they actually take the steps to improve themselves. Right? Because I think life is a journey in itself. And that's why I included the word journey in the podcast, right? Because I feel like regardless of which stage you are at, even after maybe you found your purpose in that sense, there are still things that you have to improve on, that you have to work on, that you have to deal with, even at that point in your life. So at every stage in your life is a journey in itself. And through the podcast, what I just wanted for people to really understand is that you just need to be willing to be able to put yourself out there, to take certain risks, to improve on the things that you might be lacking in, and just trust in yourself. I think self-belief is one of the biggest things that you can work on, and that was the kind of impact that I wanted to bring through the podcast, that everybody is and will go through certain phases in their life where they are feeling certain like sadness, lostness, or whatever that they might be facing at that point in time. So that's for the podcast. And as for coaching, what I really want to equip people with is the kind of mindset to overcome whatever may come their way. So even when I talk about high performance, right, I don't, people might mostly refer it to maybe like career goals or like business goals. But I think a whole nother aspect of it is also with regards to like their personal goals, their relationship goals in that sense. So being a high performer doesn't just mean it's with regards to your business, but it's also how you build up your personal relationships, how you set up your personal life, your personal growth, to make sure that you excel not in just one aspect of your life, but in many other aspects as well.
Yeah, okay. I love this term, high performers. And I've seen this a couple of times when I read career-related articles about leadership as well. How do you lead a high-performing team? How do you build a high-performance culture? And it's interesting that you're trying to help people to achieve high performance with self-belief and a productivity mindset. Can you give me a bit more color on what do you mean exactly by high performers, and how does that different from not being a high performer?
Yeah, so I think one word that sort of sums up the whole thing is like excellence, having the excellence mindset of wanting to excel at whatever you do. So what I mean by that is that when you work on a project, when you take on when you start certain businesses, you go in with the mindset that you want to excel. You don't just want to go there to barely hit the cut and just survive in that sense, right? So what it means by that is that when they go in, they have I want to equip them with the mindset to deal with certain problems, to overcome certain issues, and how they can set up, let's say, their habits, their productivity systems and everything, such that they will be put in a better position to actually crush their goals, to know what are the next steps to take, right? So these are all aspects that sort of come together to define a high performer, and that will help them be able to hit the kind of goals that they want to hit.
Mm. Yeah, I think that mindset is very valuable to enable ourselves to crush our goals. But I find it difficult to or sometimes I need to remind myself that, hey, I need to get into this big picture mindset that I want to do this with excellence. Because when we go through problems, we'll be like, yeah, that is so difficult, or this thing and that thing, and then we get kind of like deep in the our head is totally submerged in the pool of problems that we suddenly don't have that mindset of being a high performer anymore. It's more like I just want to get through this. I just want this to end, I just want to do the minimum, just to scrape through this and be like, look back and actually I wish I had done it slightly differently, because at the end of the year, when it comes to performance reviews and all that kind of stuff, we kind of wish that we had done things differently. So what is one tip that you would give in terms of how do you consistently remind yourself that you need to be a high performer, or in general, how do you make sure that this high performer mindset really sticks in your mind?
I think a very important aspect of that is about feedback and review, and also growth, right? So I think those three words are more or less the same, right? I think one central theme will probably be growth in that sense. So the whole high performer thing in itself, right, is always the concept of striving to do better next time. So even for myself, I'm not saying that, I have the best mindset. I go out every day feeling super motivated to crush my day. Everybody has off days. Everybody has days that they don't want to do anything, right? But it's about setting in systems the kinds of actions that you will take upon feeling those things, and how you go back to why you want to achieve certain things, right? So that's where the growth mindset, the reviewing what you've done, is very important. So one thing that I like to do at the end of every day is I like to journal and write down the things that I've experienced throughout the day. So, if I have a bad day, I want to write down how was I feeling, why was I feeling the kinds of feelings that I was feeling. there was a lot of feeling. But yeah, you get the concept. So I want to be very aware of how I was feeling at that point in time, what I can do the next time I feel similar emotions to make sure that I don't do the same things again. So it's a lot about reviewing your things that you've done in the past and tweaking that to say, what I can do next time I face that, so that I won't encounter a similar issue, right? So I think the growth mindset is a very important aspect of this whole like high performance topic, because everybody needs to start somewhere, and as long as you put in the work to be 1% better the next day, eventually you'll get to somewhere, right? So it's very important to reflect on what you've done, learn from your mistakes, and then eventually climb the ladder.
If I may coin a mindset out of this to combine the growth mindset with high performance, I would call it the higher performance mindset, because we're just getting higher. We may be here today, but if I can get there tomorrow, we're higher. Yeah, I love the tips that you just shared, journaling and writing down your feelings, because those tips are very common tips that people will recommend to improve your performance. And those tips actually sound like exercise. It's a good exercise, but when it comes to exercise, people will be like, it's too troublesome, don't want to do this. But if you really take the action to do it, I believe that we can reap the benefits out of it. And you mentioned also creating systems to respond almost systematically or spontaneously to whenever you feel down, or whenever you felt certain trigger emotions, and you kind of are able to respond in a way that you want to, instead of veering down the wrong path. I think that's really powerful as well, in order to have those preparations.
If I could just give one example, it's like your energy levels on a daily basis, right? So when you work on certain tasks, you will kind of understand what tasks require more brain power, requires more of you thinking, and you are more afraid to do them because they are a little bit more difficult. So what I've been doing for myself is I understand at which point in times of a day where I'm most energetic or most willing to do certain things, right? So naturally, after lunch is a bad time for me because I like food coma and I don't want to do a lot of things. Yeah, so then I work my schedule around those ups and downs, such that I'll be able to focus on the task at hand when I'm doing those, right? So understanding things like that and reviewing your day, reviewing your week to see what days were you more productive, what days were you not as productive. Those kinds of things add up, because once you understand how you work, and you insert those systems to help you achieve certain things better, then it gets better over time.
Great. I think we have a lot in common because I have thoughts about how to, schedule my day around and plan activities around the times of the day. In the morning, that's probably when I can do the most difficult work, and then in the afternoon I can do the slightly more easy ones, and then in the evenings maybe something of medium difficulty. Great. Marcus, thanks for joining me in this podcast. Tell us a little bit more about where we can find you and how can we connect with you for other listeners who want to.
I'm pretty much on Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook, but I don't use Facebook much. But my handles are the same across. So it's Marcus Cheu, MarCuscheu. So that's on Instagram, that's on LinkedIn, that's on Facebook. And for the podcast, it's JourneyNorth.mc on Instagram. And yeah, Instagram is for now the main platform that I have for the podcast.
.mc.Marcus Cheu, right? Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Marcus, for joining me in this podcast and sharing very candidly about your coaching business as well as your startup experience, which will enable you to share very useful tips for others who are struggling with similar issues. So thank you, Marcus, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was my pleasure speaking on this, and thank you for the opportunity.